The true number killed in the 9-month battle to liberate Mosul from ISIS has not been acknowledged by the U.S.-led coalition. Families grapple with the effect the ISIS school system has had on their children and the reality of what could be a generation of radicals. A convoy of vehicles was due to leave the city under the arrangement which was brokered by the Raqqa Civil Council and tribal elders, the statement said. Can a jihadi who went to fight in Syria be peacey reintegrated into society? How can governments be sure he won't carry out attacks once he's back at home? A group of 1,100 former ISIS slaves, mostly Yazidi women, are now living in Germany as part of a program to help them heal. A recent ISIS recruiting video is the latest sign the terror group wants to steer jihadis to the Islamist uprising in the Philippines instead of Syria and Iraq. Teachers hope that children who lived under ISIS for years can be freed from their indoctrination so they don't grow up to be jihadis. American Dave Eubank and his family do humanitarian work for the Free Burma Rangers from Mosul, Iraq to outside Aleppo, Syria. One noted ISIS figure told his followers the U.S. is run by a fool who does not know what Islam is, who continues to express his hatred and war. Trump told them ISIS used stolen airport equipment to test a bomb that could be hidden in electronic devices, and said where the intel was gathered. Some 80,000 people are trapped in a scrubland of hopelessness in a forgotten corner of the Middle East. Huddling in the wind, walled in by desert sandbanks, they have been driven there by war. Abandoned by governments, they are preyed on by the very ISIS gunmen and suicide bombers they fled their homelands to escape. NBC News was given unique access to the area, which one Jordanian official described as an imminent threat. An 18-year-old Iraqi explains one reason why he fled the fierce fighting in Mosul between Iraqi forces and the Islamic State. ISIS cut off his hand. A series of airstrikes targeting senior ISIS commanders in Iraq has killed scores of militants, including several senior commanders. Receipts from taxi rides, ledgers listing internet usage and random logbooks are just some of the documents that ISIS militants left behind. Supported by the United States, the Iraq-led coalition has recaptured at least 70% of eastern Mosul during a months-long battle. I was much more afraid of women, Fatma, a 28-year-old mother of 3, told NBC News. The women would beat you for the smallest thing. If ISIS' oppressive rule had been unbearable when the group was at its most powerful, it became even worse under its decline. 2 weeks after America began backing Iraqi and Kurdish forces assaulting Mosul, the U.S. has thrown its weight behind an effort to retake Raqqa. Iraqi children finally get a chance to go back to makeshift classrooms and sing and play without fear of ISIS. Few doubt ISIS will eventually be dislodged from Mosul, but how it is governed afterwards will truly determine whether the operation is a success. ISIS is about to face a war on 2 fronts, and it seems unlikely that the group's self-declared caliphate will survive it. Raqqa is the de facto capital of the extremist so-called caliphate which stretches from Syria into Iraq. President Tayyip Erdogan is reasserting Turkey's historic territorial claims while also trying to crush Kurdish separatists. Here's a rundown of who's involved in the Mosul offensive, and what they want. The international human rights lawyer spoke exclusively to NBC News about her fight for the persecuted people. ISIS controlled Fallujah from January 2014 to June 2016, when Iraqi troops backed by U.S.-led airstrikes liberated the city. Here's what the militants left behind. One of 3 schoolgirls who left their homes in Bethnal Green to join the Islamic State is believed to have been killed by an airstrike in Raqqa. ITV Western nations have made it harder for citizens to join ISIS in Syria, so some fighters are conducting operations at home. Was the wave of recent attacks, from Turkey to Bangladesh, Baghdad to Medina, a sign of ISIS' strength or weakness? The Caracal Battalion was founded in 2000 as the country's first to mix male and female soldiers fighting side by side. The 27-year-old New York man tells his story of joining and escaping the terror group. The 27-year-old is now in federal custody and cooperating with authorities. They were from Silicon Valley and suburban Ohio and ended up in Syria. Teenagers are being turned into weapons by ISIS, triggering fears that they could slip back to the West to launch attacks. Jafri Khan, Zakia Nazrin and Raisel Ryan lived in Ohio before joining the terror group. Among thousands of ISIS recruits listed in the terror group's personnel files, there are names of Americans who've traveled to Syria. By his own account, the man, who calls himself Abu Muhammad, is an accomplice to murder and a thief. Files on more than 4,000 fighters provide a deeper understanding of who signed up for ISIS. ISIS leaders on the U.S. kill list have escaped, say critics, because the Obama administration will only let the CIA use its drones for surveillance. Thousands of documents apparently leaked from inside ISIS paint a detailed picture of the terror group's personnel. Danger has always been part of my life, Femen leader Ina Shevchenko said. ISIS started off the year with a bang, but 2015 has been a mixed bag for the terror group. Here's a look at how the year has played out. ISIS is transmitting hours of extremist propaganda into homes deep in one of Afghanistan's biggest cities for the first time. At least one of the 34 countries listed by Saudi Arabia appeared surprised to be included in the group spanning the Middle East, Asia and Africa. Abu Muhammad al-Adnani is the man behind the terror group's strategy of mass murder around the world. While Rob Malley has decades of experience in national security, he's a lightning rod who has had his share of controversy concerning the Middle East. ISIS still holds some 2,000 Yazidi women and girls, according to community leaders. Here some of the survivors and family members speak out. Yazidi legislator Vian Dakhil is a desperate people's last and only hope. For many Yazidi exiles in the U.S., this year's Thanksgiving feast will include a big side of gratitude for their deliverance from ISIS. One man is fighting to chronicle the death of one of the world's oldest religions, the Yazidis, at the hands of one of its newest terror groups, ISIS. Fiona Ayub looked like she'd stepped out of the pages of a glossy Western bridal magazine, save for the rubble strewn behind her. Mohammed Emwazi participated in numerous propaganda videos showing Westerners being beheaded. The ISIS killer dubbed Jihadi John once vowed to achieve fame as a professional soccer player by the age of 30. There is no vengeance, but there is accountability, a senior U.S. official told NBC News. The U.S. airstrike targeting the ISIS fighter nicknamed Jihadi John shows the U.S. has sophisticated intelligence and will serve as a morale blow. The families of Western hostages murdered by ISIS have expressed mixed feelings about news that Mohammed Emwazi was targeted by a U.S. airstrike. This is the most important international police operation in Europe in 20 years, Italian anti-terrorism chief Giuseppe Governale said. The beheading of 7 civilians, including women and a child, by ISIS-linked militants in Afghanistan has raised fears that the terror group is tightening its grip. ISIS seized control of Mosul in 2014. Egypt's Interior Ministry said Ali Ashraf Hassanein al-Gharibli masterminded the kidnap and murder of American oil worker William Henderson. 7 civilians, including 3 women and a child, have been beheaded by suspected ISIS-linked militants in southern Afghanistan. The double murder achieved its goal. It sent the message that, even here in the relative safety of Turkey, ISIS and its supporters can reach critics. Raqqa is being slaughtered silently has been documenting ISIS abuses. The White House was expected to announce the move later Friday. The rapper, born Dennis Cuthbert, had performed under the name Dizzo Dog prior to joining ISIS. The revelation came a day after U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter said the U.S. may carry out more unilateral ground raids in Iraq to target ISIS militants. A new video purports to show Thursday's raid in Iraq in which dozens of ISIS hostages were freed and an American commando was killed. When presidents need to take out a terrorist or rescue hostages in a war zone, they turn to covert military units like Delta Force. Authorities believe the account was created to lure in current law enforcement officers and collect their personal information. IHS data showed the vast majority of attacks during the reporting period, just over 83%, were in Iraq and Syria. The feds have arrested the who allegedly gave personal data of government officials to ISIS. Frustrated by what they see as America's failure to defeat ISIS, some Iraqi civilians want Russia to start bombing on their soil. The rebel captain blames a lack of trainees and poor salaries for the train and equip program's failure. These days Syrian Bashar al-Assad is so weak Russia and Iran are effectively running Syria. After years of bringing hope to others, Syria's piano man has fled, his instruments destroyed by ISIS militants. A video released by ISIS appeared to show more than a dozen of the terror group's fighters undergoing weapons training on American M16 rifles. Iraqi refugees fleeing ISIS are living in fear. Swaths of humanitarian health services risk being axed because of a lack of international funding. The horrific execution tactic is the latest in a string of brutal punishment methods applied by ISIS under its strict interpretation of Islamic, or Sharia, law. American citizen Keith Broomfield, who was killed fighting ISIS, believed it was God's will that he go to Syria, his mother told NBC News. Who exactly is behind the assault on Iraq's key cities? Here's a primer on ISIS, Sunni militants waging a bloody battle to establish an Islamic State. Just what are the U.S. allies in the region bringing to the fight that isn't America's fight alone? While Osama bin Laden launched the 9/11 attacks and helped the Taliban take over Afghanistan, he never controlled a vast territory like ISIS now does. Last November, real, true contact was made, but the conversation was over almost as soon as it began. Two boys recount to NBC News their imprisonment and torture at the hands of ISIS. One Yazidi woman, held captive by ISIS, recalls members of the terrorist organization calling prisoners infidels and saying, "We will do what we want with you." Video obtained by NBC News and smuggled out of the ISIS stronghold of Raqqa offers a rare glimpse into life under the militants. The more time on target, the better the estimate, a senior U.S. official told NBC News. Students from Iraq's University of Baghdad are using their summer break to learn how to fight ISIS. It simply took a social media account for Mohammed Deklal and his wife, Jaylin Young, to connect with ISIS militants. "If I can fight against them with then my is as powerful as or more powerful than their weapons," said Helly Love. Three women who spoke to NBC News were members of ISIS morality police. They described life under the terror group's harsh rule in Syria. Are Russia and Iran set to abandon ally Syrian President Bashar Assad? NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel looks at what may happen. Turkey's leader has offered a simple and resolute explanation for the simultaneous strikes. ISIS are terrorists and the PKK are terrorists. Fleeing ISIS fighters have laid so many landmines that at least 15 villages around Hasaka, Syria, are now uninhabitable, a Kurdish commander said. A man who dropped out of college to join ISIS said after being captured becoming a member of the extremist group was the worst decision he's made. Robert Rose, a single dad from the South Bronx, is one of around 400 foreigners fighting with Kurdish forces against ISIS in Syria. This is his story. ISIS is all about creating an Islamic state, but to parents of kids who've joined the caliphate, the group's appeal often comes down to cash. Iraqi Christians driven from their homes by ISIS have formed a militia and are fighting to retake their homeland from the extremists. A bloody past and centuries of mistrust between two branches of Islam may doom Iraq's bid to crush ISIS. A video statement issued by ISIS channels in Syria addressed the tyrants of Hamas and vowed to uproot the Palestinian organization.